You're listening to Inside Content, the TV industry podcast. This show is brought to you by 3Vision, a global TV industry consultancy specialising in content acquisition, strategy, research and business development. Each episode, we give you VIP access to the views and experiences of senior TV executives and discuss the latest TV industry trends and insights.
On this episode, I'm joined by Kerry Ball, Chief Acquisitions and Commercial Officer at BritBox International. Kerry joined BritBox in July 2022 and is responsible for group content acquisition and commercial strategy across their key markets. We explore the positioning of BritBox in international markets, the breakdown of their content strategy, as well as their exciting involvement in the FAST space. We also touch on their distribution strategy and digital originals. Hi Kerry, thanks for joining us on Inside Content.
Hello, it's nice to see you, Toby. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Obviously, you bring lots of experience from the earlier parts of your career at companies like NBC Universal and Discovery, and now you're at BritBox International. So to kick off, maybe you could just take us through an overview of what BritBox International is as a business, where it's up to with your rollout, and talk us through a bit about your role in the company.
Sure, of course. So I am Chief Acquisition and Commercial Officer for BritBox International. And this involves looking at our commercial strategy, routes to market distribution, and partnerships. The overall aim being to grow BritBox International footprint and monetization. We've also traditionally had a very strong acquisition team in each of our territories who are laser focused on what content works for our subscribers. And my role there is to leverage the deep customer knowledge from a multi-territory approach in our future acquisition strategy in terms of the what and the how. With regards to BritBox overall, we are 5 years old in the States. And since then, we've launched in Canada, Australia, South Africa, and less than a year ago in the Nordics. We're very happy with our continued growth in each of those markets. We've built a really strong proposition. And whilst each are in different phases of their launch, we're seeing continued growth across the board and a strengthening of the service. The speciality SVOD sector is continuing to strengthen, and we see our role within that sector as very important, and see ourselves taking market share across the board. And I think, in some markets where big players are plateauing, you're seeing, but you're also seeing the number of SVODs per household increase. Some of these speciality SVODs are really taking the charge there.
Thanks. So that's really interesting. I've lots of follow-up questions for you, Kerry. First of all, in terms of the kind of the proposition and the positioning of the service, is that very similar in each market, or is it kind of tweaked in some way for the specific market conditions, or because of what content might be available?
Yes. Well, BritBox is super focused on British content. We offer subscribers across our markets the largest collection of British mysteries, dramas, comedies, lifestyle, all in one place. And our content mix is broadening. That content spans gritty thrillers to cozy crime to nostalgic TV. It spans strong returners to those that are really event-driven. And whilst the markets may differ in terms of the performance of the verticals within that, as a whole, the composition of the service is similar.
Right. Okay. Got you. And in terms of the process about thinking about which markets you have gone into so far and kind of evaluating future ones, because I'm presuming you're keen to carry on growing. Obviously a lot of the initial ones were English speaking, and then you've got into the Nordics. Is there how do you evaluate the different markets? Is it about like looking at where there is a strong affinity with British programming, or is it about where there is kind of content available from the shareholders to help support the launch, or both of those, or other things also?
Yeah, I think when you launch in any new market, you should never be driven by what's available. You should be driven by whether there's an appetite for that service and that content. And is there a space? Can we deliver something that will super serve a particular group of customers, viewers? The state of the market, the maturity of the market is quite important. And certainly when you start looking in non-English speaking markets, from past experience, you really need to make sure that there is an affinity with the type of content that you're creating and distributing. So I think all of that comes into play when you look at further markets. We've launched a few markets in the last couple of years. So we're very much focused on going deeper and broadening in terms of distribution and reach within those markets, whilst we consider sort of where our content will perform in the way that it does in our existing markets.
Yeah, okay, makes perfect sense. And I guess when you're looking at non-English speaking markets, you also need to consider the kind of localization costs and practicalities. So I guess the Nordic markets, where people are really kind of happy with subtitling, is more less economically challenging in the business case than a market where people expect dubbing.
Yes, that's true. I mean, we need to look at all factors when we enter into a market in terms of being able to really weigh up its potential, the costs involved, as well as the affiliation for that content that we're delivering. Great.
So in terms of your kind of whole content portfolio, obviously you have two great shareholders in BBC and ITV who have massive content libraries and a great output of content being continuously produced. And I imagine that's the backbone of your proposition. How much of the content comes from them? How can you share anything about how you interact with them, in terms of what content comes onto the service, what they might be taking to other parties, and then also I'm guessing they don't provide everything you need, and you're acquiring content from third parties. Could you talk a bit about what you look for from the third party players?
Yes, of course. And you're right. A great deal of our content comes from ITV and BBC. They have very deep archives that laser focus around our brand and enable us to deliver a service that is so broad and deep at the same time. However, third parties represent some of the most incredible shows in our landscape, and so they also allow opportunities for premieres and co-pros, as well as really important library TV and film titles in the catalogue. If a show is a key BritBox show and it has that stamp of authenticity across our key content neighborhoods, we will want to try to get it on the service. We also, of course, co-produce and commission with our shareholders from third parties, as well as from ITV studios and BBC studios. In terms of what we're looking for, we're looking for well-crafted, intriguing and rewarding stories with interesting and intense characters, and have that distinctive Britishness at its core. the mysteries, thrillers, dramas perform really well, but even then, they can vary across their own spectrum. And nostalgia also drives the content on some of our services with the uniquely comedic perennials and panel shows, which allows us to create a really rounded offering between both our shareholders and our third-party agreements. The other thing, I think, it's in terms of what we're looking for, whilst we look for returners like every SVOD on the planet, the story drives all. And I think especially if it can encapsulate the zeitgeist of the moment. We recently launched Stonehouse in the US, which we co-produced with ITV and Banijay. And that is an example of a tale of a politician who faked his own death. And it might have been set in the 70s, but it still reflects the political landscape today in many varying places around the world. So we think we have an important place to play in the UK production and distribution world. And we're very excited to work with some of our sector's greatest talents.
Wow, that's really, really interesting, Kerry. So one of the other things I was interested to talk about a bit more was how originals, if you like, fit into your strategy. And I guess with a show like Stonehouse, that's obviously, like you just said, is a co-production. In the US market, do you position that as an original? How do you kind of present that to your subscribers?
So yes, originals are a very important part of our strategy. They drive acquisition and engagement on the platform, which is the two key things you need to be doing if you're going to have a successful SVOD. Our originals, like all subscription services, actually are comprised of commissions, co-productions, and premieres. And we partner both with shareholders and third parties to create that slate of high-end premium drama, crime, co-productions, as well as many more. A few examples, actually, of some things we've got coming up. Archie, which is the incredible story of Cary Grant, with a riveting and very tanned Jason Isaacs. And we partnered with ITV Studios and ITV on that. Three Little Birds, loosely inspired on Lenny Henry's mother's story of coming to the UK with two others and moving to Birmingham, which is co-pro with ITV and Banijay. And then Beyond Paradise, which we're super excited about. It's the spin-off from the extremely successful Death in Paradise. It sees Chris Marshall and Sally Breton coming back to these shores with the BBC. And we've got a deeper and bigger lineup. I could rattle off our slate all day. But I think, to your point around Stonehouse, Stonehouse is a co-production. So in those situations, we will work with a UK broadcaster to bring that content to life. We have some originals that will be the first window and the premiere. And then we have some that will be commissions, as I said. I think, getting that balance right that I mentioned before between the returners, which are things like Vera, Shetland, Father Brown, Sister Boniface, they're huge drivers for us. And they retain engagement, they bring people in, that they've got deep libraries, and we stack the catalogue so that people can pick up at any one point. But also, those story-driven events like Archie and Stonehouse, really allow us to create a broad service, allow us to keep putting brand new original content onto the service, and attain different different ways we can get our brand to reach into different demographics. Another thing actually that is a key differentiator for BritBox, thinking about it, is that and it's a different take on originals per se, is that we've become an important broadcaster for uniquely British live events too. So from Harry and Meghan's wedding to the Jubilee to BAFTA Film Awards, which we just announced we are streaming again this year, the Chelsea Flower Show, and then indeed recently the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So these are a different form of original, if you like, in our markets, and extremely sort of sticky events that make people come back to the service time and time again.
Yeah, that's I think that's a smart strategy. That's a good way to it's a good way to differentiate with those those big high profile events. I mean, in terms of kind of new original shows, do you have like a sort of target number that you'd kind of would look to premiere every year, or does it just depend on the when the right projects come along to you?
No, I mean, obviously we have a very deep content budget, but especially with originals, they are planned a long time in advance, if you like. Sure. By the time that the co-productions and the commissions come out, we make sure that we have a release schedule in every territory that is bringing new content into the service and is supported and in its own neighborhood and building on content and library that we have. So you create that network and neighborhood effect. Evans, which we launched last year, why didn't they ask Evans? That builds on a really strong Agatha Christie library that we have in our slate, and it allows a fresh take and a new sort of viewer to come into that, as well as satisfying our traditional base.
Okay, great. Well, look, let's change direction a little bit and talk about distribution, if that's okay. I'm interested to get your thoughts about your kind of distribution strategy, and how important partners are for distribution, as opposed to just going straight direct to consumer.
I think partners are very important, and you know me of old. Distribution is my bread and butter, and I believe strongly we live in a fragmented consumer landscape, and consumers have preferences for how they access their content and services and on what devices. Consumers now are savvy streamers, and the consumption platforms can be a number of things. They can be a hygiene factor. They can be a discovery awareness driver for a brand, as they may like your content but not know of your brand. And increasingly, they're a management tool, especially as people have a number of subscriptions within their armory. Consumers like different platforms to be able to control and manage those different subscription packages that they have. So it's very important you work across marketplaces, devices within the D2C world. And it's very important that you are also distributed across syndication services for those based on the ingest model. Both of those factors allow you to widen the net to find as many of your consumers as possible. They also allow you to reduce friction in sign up and experience, and broaden that awareness and attraction beyond your first and second adopter, which is easier to find through your marketing drives. I think it's not only about the acquisition profiles exhibited by different platforms, though, but also around churn. and churn is exhibited differently with those partners as well. So you need to be very tactical in terms of the different techniques and tactics that you use to be able to ensure that you're maximizing each and every platform.
Just for our listeners who might not know what the ingest model is, could you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So the ingest model is really where people are creating your service within their interface and environment. So Amazon channels, Roku channels, Apple channels are all examples of where you create the same service through creating your brand and your content within their platform.
Okay, good. That's what I thought it was. In terms of that, that way of distributing, are there? Some people have said to me that can be a good way to, it's a good way to reach different audiences, but it can be problematic in terms of the amount of data you get and a kind of understanding you get of those subscribers. Would you say that that's true?
The data argument has always been the reason to not do those deals. I think the platforms are sharing more and more data than they did in the past. I think and part of the reason for that is that if you're certainly as we look at the content side of our business, we need to make sure that as we're commissioning and creating content, that it's working across our entire base, not just in terms of one part of the base that we have data for. And I think that's why the ability to really understand and get down into the different demographics across the entire platform is really important, because it allows you to make those content decisions as well. So yeah, is there a limit? Are you more limited on data through those models? Yes. Do they deliver incrementality for you? I'd say I strongly believe that.
Okay, got you. So now let's talk a little bit about the exciting, fast-growing world of fast channels. So that's certainly been something that lots and lots of people have been getting very excited about. And I think when we were at MIPCOM this year, every single meeting that we had, one way or another, we ended up talking about the fast channel space. I'm interested in your views on that generally, and obviously on kind of its relevance for BritBox specifically, because we have seen that you have a BritBox fast channel in the US already. So
as you may know, I used to consult in the fast world as well for a few years. So I have a lot of views on fast. I think fast is obviously a super exciting world. There are so many different fast platforms now and so much inventory that I think we're still very much in the sort of forming part of the industry. I also think it differs considerably by territory, and those there are different drivers towards fast if you're in the US than in the UK than in Australia. Those territories that have really strong public sector broadcasters and therefore less advertising per se, because of the ad tolerance loads in those countries, are on a different evolutionary path or speed than those who don't. So I think fast is a bit of an onion. There's going to be a lot of layering. There's going to be a lot of understanding how far the ad tolerance goes. In terms of SVODs, I think fast could be a potential Barker channel, like if you have a laser sharp eye on scheduling and you're creating something that is creating an upsell, you know, that there's a potential there. There's lots of other ways that's being looked at as well. You know, services are sampling content in front of their paywalls, and that's driving really interesting and encouraging results. What we see in BritBox is that when people we see lots of people experiencing our brand for the first time and our content for the first time. And we are able to very quickly move them to a deeper relationship. We're very confident once we get a consumer, we keep them. And it's very early days for us at least. But I think for a lot of SVODs to see how fast can work as a companion. And there's certainly, we're very focused on what we need to do to provide those engaging and enriching experiences the first time a consumer touches our brand.
Okay, and that could be fast, but it could be many other things.
But there's lots of, there are lots of other tools to be able to do that. And I think we need to investigate and in some cases experiment with what we have to ensure what works and what doesn't. I think it's also, SVODs have very different personalities. And if you're a general entertainment SVOD, you might have a different challenge than especially if you're a super high quality speciality service, than if you're a sports service. Each one of those is going to touch the market and have a different consumer stickiness problem, if you like, or positive trait to bring people into the service. And so I think it isn't going to be one size fits all. These services are going to be used at different points of maturity and for different reasons. Is it about finding a different monetization path? Is it about creating an upsell channel? Is it about allowing your brand to reach into different areas? Is it about maintaining this sort of prestigious quality that a brand may have? So I think you really have to answer that question of what are you trying to obtain and use before you can get to the solution.
Great, very interesting. Well, Kerry, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. It's been a super interesting conversation, loads of fantastic insights. Thank you very much. And I hope that you'll come on the show again, maybe in like a year's time, and we can talk about all the developments and maybe additional rollouts that you've been overseeing at BritBox International. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside Content from 3Vision. You can always reach out to us at 3vision.tv if you want to learn more. Or, if you're a business with ambition in the content world, our consultancy services can help. With decades of combined experience, we know the ins and outs of the industry like nobody else. Catch us next time on Inside Content.